Hi, my name is Dr. Asia Eaton. I'm a psychological scientist and public psychologist, and this is Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. In this podcast, we invite human rights defenders to teach and learn from brain and behavioral scientists about how we can all use science to do human rights work that is more efficient and impactful. Hello! It is Wednesday, August 27th, 2025, and this is Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. My name is Asia, and today I'm hosting Yana and Esther to teach us about the science and practice of arts-based activism. Yana Tavernier is a human rights activist, social innovator, and the co-founder and executive director of Fine Acts, a global creative studio for social change. Her work explores how art and creativity can accelerate impact in activism and human rights, bridging the worlds of artists, technologists, and civil society. She has a BA in communications and an MA in political science from Sofia University, along with executive education at Harvard, Yale, Oxford, and NTU-Singapore. She's a TED Senior Fellow, check out her TED Talk, a Fulbright Scholar, a WEF Young Global Leader, an Allianz Foundation Fellow, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. Welcome.
Hi, Asia. Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this conversation with you and Esther.
Esther Shapiro-Rock was born in Havana, Cuba, to Eastern European Jewish immigrants. Fortunate to begin her education in revolutionary times before immigrating to racially segregated Miami, where I am at the moment. Trained first as an immigrant and then as a clinical psychologist, she recently retired from the psychology faculty at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and continues to work with Mauricio Gaston Institute for Latino Public Policy and other activist educational programs. Her work explores the transformational power of education and creative arts in promoting personal wellness and bridging cultural differences while supporting collaborative actions to achieve community-centered social justice. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Of course, it's my privilege. Yana, we'll start with you. Tell us, how did you get involved in using art for activism?
I will try to be brief here. My background is in investigative journalism. I used to be a journalist who was focusing on human rights issues. So to give you an example, I spent years investigating the situation in institutions for people with intellectual and mental health disabilities across Eastern Europe. So I would be going to these places undercover, and then I would be reporting on the inhumane conditions in these places. And basically, I would be trying to close these places down with my reporting. Unfortunately, I could claim from the dozens and dozens of institutions I visited across 5 countries, I could only claim that I helped close only one. So yes, I raised awareness about inhuman degrading treatment. Yes, people knew what is going on there, but only one place closed down, which led to incredible frustration and really feeling like a failure kind of all the time. And this frustration led me to activism. I was invited to establish the campaigns department in the largest human rights organization in Bulgaria, called the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee. I said yes, because it sounded like it's kind of a shortcut to where I wanted to go to have real impact. Going there, I really didn't know that. I only knew about journalism. I had like zero idea how campaigning is done. I bought a bunch of books, and I was kind of led by these books and by my own gut. And both of these sources were telling me that I need to not rely on something that I was seeing not only in the human rights field in Bulgaria, but also in like others in Eastern Europe back then. Not rely on the very, I would say, outdated methods of communications and campaigning that I was seeing. So incredible work on the ground was being done by my colleagues. But at the same time, this work then translated into a press conference, a press release, an interview, like really things that, and also the emotions were very specific. They were always like very angry, very sad, very like negative tones. And I really want to do something different. So something that I started doing back then was experimenting with collaborations with people from different disciplines, and namely with artists. So I did a bunch of collaborations with artists, with illustrators, with photographers on different human rights campaigns. And always these were components in the larger campaign. But actually what I kept seeing is that every single time these components of the larger campaigns, the collaborations with artists, were the ones that gripped people by the throat, were the ones that people talked about, were the parts of the campaign that actually led people to do something. These were the parts that stuck. So this made me truly understand. Yes, I have been hearing a lot about the power of art to induce empathy, the power of art to translate complex messages into a language that makes people understand and compels them to act. So I have been hearing this, but I kept seeing this. And yes, so to keep this very long story short, at a certain point, I really wanted to translate this personal experience into an organization, which is FineAct, international organization that initially was meant to help others like me, like other activists, understand the power and the potential of true, real collaboration with artists. And I'm saying true, real collaboration with artists because here I don't mean telling artists what to do, because actually a lot of like people in these kind of organizations are instrumentalizing art in a way that is A, shouldn't be done, B, is really not effective. Because what I see is that if you brief an artist, so you explain what the issue is, what the data is, what the facts are, but then you leave space for creative freedom, this is where the magic happens. It's not by telling the artist, like, do this in this way. So this is how I started my work, and this is why I'm doing it. It has evolved since then, but yeah, I'll stop here.
Wonderful. Let me turn briefly to Esther and ask you, how did you get into studying arts-based activism?
Let me start by saying that I'm not a traditional psychology researcher. I wanted to do more of an academic psychology career, but I'm part of an Eastern Cuban Jewish family that's been transplanted to the Miami area. A cousin from Cuba, one of the few socialist members of the family whom I've visited many times until she and her family left Cuba, told me Cuban Jews are the most anti-education Jews in the world. So in order to have a life and an education, I needed to be able to support myself. That's where clinical psychology was my, necessary choice. Worst comes to worst, I can't get an academic job. I'll be able to at least support myself in practice. And I think I was lucky first to not get an academic job so that I got to be kind of a freelancer, free range, and I learned enormously from the families I worked with. And then UMass Boston desperately needed somebody to help them implement a social justice clinical psychology program. And UMass Boston is an urban commuter campus with a mandate of not compete with elite institutions or UMass Amherst. So the beauty of that requirement by the state legislature is that the only way to do research at UMass Boston was for faculty to create these activist institutes. And the activist institutes became where you could do your work that was studying questions relevant to Boston communities. So I landed there in 1989, the same month the Mauricio Gaston Institute opened. And they were focused on organizing Latinos in the state and using that organizing to implement community partnered policy programs. You see my luck. And Paulo Freire's translator was one of our faculty in the program Applied Linguistics. My department is trying to get me to be a traditional psychologist, forbade me to have anything to do with all of these activist programs. And as usual, I said, I don't think so. I'm going to do it my mind and heart guide. And I discovered the campus was filled with all of these Freireans. The Disabilities Access Office was run by someone else I was told not to have anything to do with. And she was one of the co-authors of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the whole campus had this, except for my department, the whole campus had this beautiful sense of you gotta learn and teach for social justice actions, however you chose it. So I was already asking questions about, as a feminist in between sociology and psychology, about why does everybody say they want gender equity, but they can't achieve it? So, if you do feminist studies, there's always an action component. And like I said, that revolutionary radio childhood, my family accepted socialist revolution. Batista, the dictatorship was so bad. They accepted it until they socialized all businesses and residences. And at my father's funeral a year ago, I was asked to speak. And I reminded everybody that my father had met with one of the revolutionary St. Fuego's brothers and asked them, don't take everything. Why don't you just take half? I loved that story as an attempt to make social justice work for a business-oriented family. I thought that was adorable. One of the nicer things I could say about my tyrannical father, as it happens.
As you said, you don't hold back. I love it. So tell me a little bit then about how you ended up using art for psychology. So, you've talked about being in a space where you're learning and teaching for social justice, doing community-based work. But how did you end up learning about liberation psychology and arts-based activism and, as your chapter says, artivism?
We'll talk about this later, Yana. I think Platonism degrades the impact and power of what you do. People hear play and they hear not so serious. As you can see, I'm very interested in how languages shape our thinking. From the first work I was doing at the university, we had a center run by anti-war Vietnam veterans on writing for political transformation. So right away, I enrolled in their courses. I had amazing teachers. And when you think about it, mental health practice is about rewriting narratives. And one of the things that I appreciated is there was a lot of misinformation in the psychotherapy field that was corrected in the writings of compelling authors. And one of the first pieces I wrote for a psychology journal was on Isabel Allende's book about the death of her daughter, Paula. For many years, and still to this day, there's a lot of wrong information about the human experience of death, loss, and bereavement. And that became one of my earliest interventionist projects to change the way people talked about death, grief, and loss, so that it was developmentally oriented, not pathologized. So Isabel Allende, that paper is called The Healing Power of Culture Stories, What Writers Can Teach Psychotherapists. And it was a recognition that it became crystallized for me later as the capitalist health and mental health industry in the United States makes money when problems get worse. And so they feed on making people worse. I'm sorry to say it that crassly. So that was my first official step. And then I also was, because of my involvement with the Joyner Center and with activist writers like Marjorie Agosin, blessed memory, she died very recently. She's a Chilean, was a Chilean writer who taught in the area, the Boston area. So she started to ask me to contribute, personal narratives of my Cuban Jewish experience. Very early on, I was already skeptical of the mental health industry as it became more profit-oriented and diagnostically oriented. Diagnosis is a false straitjacket. It is a straitjacket and it's not even true. So there you have it.
Let me ask then, Yana, because you brought it up, Esther, how you ended up in Platonism and what you consider Platonism. Esther, you were saying that writing is one of many art forms that can be used to support psychological healing and wellness. Jana, what do you consider under the umbrella of Playtivism, and what is it?
Just briefly before I answer this question, I just want to give a general sense of what Fine Arts does so that it makes sense as to why we entered the realm of play and this really vastly expanded our work. Basically, what we do is we are amplifying different human rights or environmental messages through art and creative campaigns. This was at the core of what we were doing for a very long time. Also, something that is very specific about us is that we're global, so we work across geographies, across art fields, across art mediums, and our work typically spans from like art interventions, public installations, videos, photography, sometimes board games, illustrations, so on and so forth. Again, something that is characteristic about us is that let's call it issue agnostic, so we work on a vast range of and we have worked on a vast range of human rights, social, environmental issues, let's say like shrinking civic space, freedom of expression, LGBTI rights, women's rights, climate change, climate justice, and so on and so on and so forth. And something, again, that is typical about what we do is we are not only producing different art actions, creative campaigns, or individual art pieces, but we are also working a lot around, let's call it capacity building. So helping other organizations understand the values of these approaches and helping others apply these to their own work. So this was at the core of our work for a while, and I would say it's still very central to what we do. But at a certain point, even before starting Fine Arts, I went through a personal burnout, basically because I was trying to juggle 3 different organizations at the same time. And it was this, this profound sense of everything is meaningless and nothing I do matters. And around this time, I discovered the work of Dr. Stuart Brown, who I think still is the head of the National Institute for Play in the US. And it was around the value of play. And there were insights that came from his work that nothing lights up the brain like play. And the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. And then I got really interested in research around play. And to finally answer your question, at a certain point, we decided that we are going to not only look at scientific insights around what makes people care, and I'll talk about this later, but also we'll look at the scientific insights around the value of play, and we'll try to build these spaces for cross-disciplinary play in activism, meaning that we'll be inviting people from other disciplines to play with activists. Why? Because this kind of multidisciplinary play sparks better ideas. When we play, others want to join, so it gets much easier to grow our movement if we have these kind of spaces where we prepare, we plan, we structure for play. As I mentioned, play can prevent the super high levels of depression and burnout amongst activists. And also it can give us the much needed feeling that we got this. And we really need this feeling right now. So yes, so this is what Playtivism is about. It refers to the value of incorporating creative play and experimentation in activism. And based on this, we have been building our own playgrounds. So these are like experimental formats where we invite people from various disciplines to play, experiment, and create with us. Sometimes these people are technologists and artists. Sometimes they're journalists and artists. Sometimes they're only visual artists paired with activists. So it really depends. We, as I said, we experiment with different approaches. Some of these are super successful and we continue to do them across the years. In other cases, we test, it doesn't really work out, and we learn from this and we move forward.
There's so much you just said that I want to pick up on. I don't even know where to begin. You know what? I'll start with the idea of play as preventative. I've never heard anyone talk about arts and play as preventative. Usually I think in psychology, we think of them as sort of things that are to address harm that's already occurred. Tell me about play as preventative and art as preventative.
I'll go to the fact that I just mentioned that we have been trying, actually, even though I would say not super professionally, but we have been trying to learn from science to the best that we can around what makes people care, around what makes people act. And some of these insights, so like cognitive science, behavioral science, neuroscience, some of these insights that we have found, and like they boil down to the fact that opinions change not through more and more information, but through empathy-inducing experiences, that visual language works way better than dry facts and abstract concepts, that art can trigger empathy, that storytelling is key and personal stories work. Like these are kind of, and also these I would say are the more obvious ones, but what really blew our minds and really shifted our thinking as to how we do our work are the insights around the fact that emotions are not really created equal, and that it's really important to think about what kind of emotions we are provoking with our work, because like when we provoke emotional responses, we must consider that if we simply evoke sadness or guilt or fear, typically this would mean that people would turn away or not respond. And in the context of general desensitization, and this is what is key for me, is that if we bet on awe, on hope, and on joy, these are the campaigns that are most effective. And here, to your question, we need empathy. And I think that this is why it's so important to harness the power of art and storytelling in our work as strategic communicators. But we also need joy. We need joy to sustain. So it's not only joy in communications. Absolutely, 100% campaigns that are rooted in joy are effective if we find, the way in which to do it. But also we need joy to sustain our movements, because it's so daunting, I would say, the current moment, that it's really important to look at joy not as something that is, in some cases, people see it as obscene, because things are so hard right now. So how can you create space for joy? How dare you? But as air. So this is how I look at play and enjoy. They're both strategic in terms of comms, but they're also super strategic in terms of sustaining ourselves.
Esther, I'm gonna open it up to you. I have so much to say, but I want to hear your take.
First of all, one quick correction, Asia. Just because my work has applications in mental health does not mean in any way that that's my endpoint. And the work I'm interested in is precisely, Jana, what you're talking about. How do we heal in ways that help people see our compelling responsibilities for collective action on those things that crush people's spirits and destroy our opportunities? And I do, just thinking about what you're saying, UMass Boston is centered on working commuter students who support their families and have been told they're not worth anything because nobody in their family went to college. Most of them are immigrants considered non-white. They're trying to learn the rules for whiteness in the United States. So cultivating joy and hope is a very important part of what I learned to do as a teacher. And I love Arjun Appadurai's. He's a communications activist in India who's done beautiful arts-based work with youth in Mumbai, I think. But I use his work on research as a human right, that we all have the right to answer questions we need for our lives to be what we want them to be. And that definition of research as a collective activist project is where my work goes. Healing is part of it. It is, as you said, a voyage of hope. And I don't know if you're both familiar with the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. She wrote the book Emergence. In the introduction to Emergence, she's also, I'm pretty sure, written a book on play. Emergence was her first well-known book. She's a US-based African-American activist, and she uses complex systems thinking in a very kind of nature as part of our ecologies to look at how participatory action is transformative. And she kind of opens the book with, let's do away with all of these individualistic, patriarchal, charitable organizations, and let's think about what nature might teach us. It's beautiful work. I'm very glad I have Dropbox folders with all of these readings. I'm glad to make one for us, so you don't have to buy any of these books on Amazon. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not saying at all that the way you're describing the value of play is so important. It was really only people often misunderstand the seriousness of what we do when we play in freedom with others.
Absolutely. Very often when I speak about play, I feel like this wall of people thinking, oh, okay, so like you're using play kind of so the warm up before doing the serious work. And I need to explain, no, play is the serious work. Play in itself is an act of resistance.
And certainly can't be truer than in the United States with its capitalist culture. And Black women are writing a lot now about the importance of stepping away from that enforced productivity. I think you'll really like some of these sources that speak exactly to this. So for me, it's more an issue of strategy. We're women. People don't take us seriously to start with. It came out of that a little bit.
One of the things I'm reflecting on as I listen to each of you speak is that this podcast proposes to bring together a human rights defender and a psychological scientist. And really, those lines are so blurred. It doesn't even make sense for me to ask some of the questions that I had prepared because, Jana, you're using science. Esther, you're an activist. And of course, I recognize there was overlap, but it's really true unity that you each are describing between those identities and those concepts. Nonetheless, Jana, I want to ask you, what do you want to tell to scientists who are working on human rights from your perspective?
First of all, a big thank you. I would say the research that we have, and once again, like it's a limited amount of research. This is not something that I think we have done enough, but for sure we have done like a big chunk of reading and focusing on and like trying to expand our understanding around making people care and act. And what does this look like really in practice? But at the same time, like there are so many things that I want to know more about. So I would love to know more about the roles of different emotions, of different approaches in this realm of making people care. What truly cuts through the noise today? I would love to see more studies that are specifically focusing on the value of art. There are such studies. There are a couple I came upon recently that are focusing on the role of climate art. But as it is so incredibly valuable for practitioners like myself, these kind of insights, more research around the value of creative play, multidisciplinary play, and experimentation. This would be incredibly valuable to us, to our work. And I'm super interested in how this kind of research can be translated into practice, into tools and strategies for both activists but also artists. The artists that we work with are incredibly interested in scientific insights, and they prove incredibly effective when we brief an artist. So it's so wonderful to be able to tell an artist, like, look, hope is not something that we prefer. Hope is actually a very smart communication strategy. Look at all these scientific data and please leave some space for hope in your work, if not entirely do it from a hope-based lens. So here I would say that it will be incredibly valuable if, apart from obviously the academic language and the scientific papers, if these kinds of findings could be made a bit more accessible, more simple, more human, more shareable, this would be incredible for activists and artists and communities in general. And maybe lastly, once again, because of my own history with burnout, I would love to learn more about evidence-based strategies for resilience. What would truly help an activist or a community protect their mental health and sustain hope in movements.
Esther, I saw you perk up. I think you probably have something to respond to that.
I am making a list of the literature reviews I'm going to do for you. So
I appreciate this.
You see my allergy to an individualistic explanation. And I want to say, because of the questions you had asked at the beginning, Asia, I wanted to make sure to clarify, I'm not a traditional psychological
Yes,
researcher. My interest is in asking the questions about how do people thrive? What stands in the way of that? How do we do that collectively rather than individualistically? What do we need to know in order to implement practices and policies, not just for the individual, but for collectives that are very site specific? That, we know that our communities and geographies are where we have to start. So I've been more interested in unifying frameworks. I've been doing this from the beginning, probably looking for systems thinking and ecological models along the lines of what Indigenous writers are writing about now, that our ecologies include all that sustains life. So my little perk up is I know more than you want to know about resilience. With the lie of individualism, and when looked at from a more community activist perspective. The community psychologists are good. There's some great Canadian researchers who study resilience. I'm on it. I'm glad
Amazing.
to share some user-friendly materials. But this myth that of rugged individualism and that the individual has strategies for resilience. Isaac Pilotensky, who's a multi-immigrant community psychologist, he's in the Miami area, has been there for many years. He says you can only be resilient as much as your environment allows you. Primo Levi said the same thing about the concentration camps. The only survivors had privileges. He happened to have a talent the concentration camp people wanted. And so he had just enough shelter to survive. Don't let anybody tell you that we do this alone. So that's Isaac's point, a beautiful paper called Wellness is Fairness that says you can only achieve that which your environment provides you with a minimum level of social justice. Without that, you'll be crushed. That's part of the sales pitch for resilience. It's an individualistic strategy for surviving cruel conditions of society. I'm dedicated to disentangling those terms.
I think in ending, I'll just acknowledge how collaborative this has been, and thank you both for that. And I want to ask you, for those who are listening, who want to do more social justice oriented, applied work, more community engaged activist work, how can we promote collaborations between those two spheres? What can folks do to make more of an impact in the world?
I really love, Esther, what you just said about the myth for the rugged individual. And I made a note of this quote, don't anyone tell you that you can do it alone. And in this same spirit, I am personally super interested in what this kind of co-creation can look like between activists and artists and scientists. I can speak to, as an activist myself, I can say that actually it's incredibly easy to open up such collaborations. Every single time when I have asked someone to step into these kind of cross-disciplinary spaces with me, I have never heard a no. People are incredibly willing. So it is not something complex. If you create the space that is honest enough, exciting enough, people will come. Because as I said, like when we play, others want to come. So sometimes it's only about being really enthusiastic about an idea and asking people from other disciplines, not only people that look and do what you do. It's actually easy. In the beginning, I've been me and my team, we have been doing this entirely, bootstrapped and zero budget, and asking people for venues for free just so that we can gather people together, and it has been incredible every time. So I would say it starts with passion and with a simple ask.
Thank you. Any final thoughts, Esther, Jana?
I wanted to make a pitch for public health as our most unifying activist space. It lets us do a lot. And by definition, it's a discipline designed for collaboration in interventions. And they're very friendly to place-based geographic insight, because you cannot do public health without recognizing where you are and who you are among. So I decided not to get a master's in public health. I thought, let me see how I can bring public health into my work. And I have had a lot of supports being in the Boston area. I'm going to recommend that people take a look at the California-based Prevention Institute and their Thrive framework. It actually came out of disabilities intervention work, but they believe in community-centered actions that incorporate problem prevention and health promotion in any treatment. And it's always done with a community activist approach. I've used a lot of their materials in teaching these courses I have been teaching that connect public health, community activism, and I guess just enough psychology to pass. We actually created a program at UMass that has a master's with a community activist requirement. I was the founding director, but I'm terrible at bureaucratic administration, so I begged somebody else to take over once we had to make it an administrative unit. But our students have done projects. One beautiful one that combined a lot of arts with interviewing was on the fundamental unity of the Dominican Republic and Haiti, where the students used dialogue groups and films and photography. And we did a campus event that was so well attended and important to the students, Dominicans and Haitian immigrants alike. It was from, I don't know, noon to 10 o'clock at night, and 300 people didn't want to leave the room. It was that important to rethink the racialization of the Dominican Republic, Haiti immigration experience and join together in experience of unity. So I'm very interested in these ways of thinking that connect us to other people, just private hope, but the commitment to make that available for as many people as possible.
Yana, Esther, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for listening. That was Mindbridge, where science meets human rights. To learn more about how we use brain and behavioral science to empower human rights defenders, find us at mindbridgecenter.org and follow us on social media.